Hey everyone, Matt here. So thanks for joining us on the channel again. This next video is a little bit different. It's an interview that I did recently with a lady called Stephanie Snade, or Steph the Psychologist as she goes by. So Steph asked me and grilled me about all things habits and behaviour change. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I do. I've got to be honest, most of the comments I've had back so far have been about my shirt rather than the content of what I was actually saying. I don't know what that tells you about about the content itself, but hopefully you enjoy both as you go through the video, and hopefully there's something in there that helps you to create new habits and make sure that you stick to them. As always, remember to like and subscribe to the channel, and let us know what you think of the video in the comments below. That'd be really useful. Enjoy.
Hi there everyone, I'm Steph the Psychologist. As you know, I've recently been bringing you a mini-series on resilience, but what I'd also like to branch out into now is bringing you some fantastic content from some of my psychology and learning and development colleagues. So today, starting us off, is Matt Smead. He's here from Sisu Psychology. Matt, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your business, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Steph. So my name's Matt. I'm a business psychologist and I own CC Psychology. So I specialise in the areas of well-being, resilience, engagement in the workplace. And the strapline we use is healthy high performance. So I've got this idea that, if people are healthy and happy in the workplace, then it's good for them as individuals, but it's also good for their organisations as well. So that's the idea. And we deliver that through things like coaching, and we do training online and face-to-face, and also do a bit of product development as well, which I can tell you a little bit more about.
Wonderful. Yeah, I absolutely love that. Wonderful. Okay, so today we're going to be chatting to you quite specifically about things like well-being, things like resilience, things like mental health, and in particular, Matt, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we can embed learning into organisations to support these elements. So what are your thoughts on that, on how we can embed that learning?
Yeah, lots. So obviously
Fab.
really interesting. So really interested in the areas of like well-being and resilience. It's what I've done for years, and interested in all different aspects around it and how to deliver the training and all that sort of thing. But what I'm really interested in is how do you get some of this stuff to actually stick? Because I don't know about you, Steph, but one of my kind of the problems or the worries that I have now and then is that I go and deliver these training sessions and I do my interventions and I think I do a really good job and the feedback tells me that I do a good job. But then, you see people for only limited amounts of time and then they kind of go away from the sessions and they say they had a brilliant time there, but then they go back into the chaos of like everyday life. And did they actually change anything? Has that actually changed anything for them as an individual, or has that had an impact on their teams or their organizations? And that is where I've found there's a little bit of a gap in the industry. I don't know what you think. But yeah, I think there's a bit of a gap there that people are delivering all sorts of really great content, but how do you measure it? And is it actually sticking? That tends to be less well known, I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And again, as we know from some of the research, that actually a lot of learning and development interventions, a lot of training that goes on in organizations doesn't embed as well into the session, after the session. So exactly as you just said, we can go in and create a great environment, a great learning space, and people can take a lot out of that in the time, and the feedback will be great from the people that have taken that course, for example, or that coaching session. But I think you're absolutely right about how do we then measure that back in the organisation so that we can show actually that these learning interventions are really adding that value back to the business. So what are some of your thoughts on how we can do that, or the things that work?
Yeah, so on an individual level, I'm big into habits. I'm really interested by habits and the power of habits. I read something the other day that said that I think 45% of everything we do on a daily basis is driven by habits and automatic behaviour. So if that's true, we need to be changing some of those habits. We need to be getting those habits to stick, to make our learning stick long term, I think. So I'm really interested. I don't know if you've come across all the science behind habits and all that side of things. So things like, have you come across this? Like models around habits? I'll tell you
Probably less so. It sounds like you've had a really good look into this. So tell us your stuff.
Sure. So there's models. There's models around habits. There's one in particular. There's a couple of different versions of it, but there's one in particular I really like, which talks about this idea of cue, behaviour, and reward. So the cue is the thing that cues you into doing the behavior. So for example, your phone rings in your pocket. You feel it, you hear it ringing. So that's the cue, right? That's my phone ringing. The behavior is you pull it out of your pocket and you put it to the side of your head. And the reward is there's someone to speak to on the other end, usually a reward. Depends who it is, I guess. But what that starts to do is it starts to automate to the point where it becomes automatic. So next time your phone rings in your pocket, you don't think, what's that noise and what do I do? You're just speaking to someone on the phone. You do it automatically. So you can do that if you want to create new habits. You can use that same sort of process. And this is what I would do kind of before, during, and after some of the sessions that I run with individuals as well. So a big one would be, how do you make the cues, your new cues perhaps, as visible or as obvious as possible? So what's the thing that's going to cue you into doing the new behavior that you want to do? So I can't think of a really complex example right now, but let's say you want to drink more water. Okay, so because it comes up a lot when I talk about well-being, it's really important.
Very important, hydration.
But people don't drink water nearly as much as they should. So how do you do that? So I would say, right, you need a cue. So even something, I know it seems a bit extreme, but set an alarm for yourself every half hour that says, drink water, drink water, drink water. People have these Fitbits and Apple Watches, don't they, that buzz. It's that cue to make you do the behavior. So you need the cue in place. Not forever, I must add. Once the habit is formed, you can get rid of some of these, but you need the cue. The second thing would be the behavior. Make it as easy as you possibly can. So in the water example, put a big bottle of water on your desk. So it's dead easy to get it. There you go. Sorted. And the last one would be reward yourself. So we always, as human beings, we prioritize immediate gratification over long-term gratification. So trying to almost reward yourself for having done. So the water maybe kind of takes care of itself, but I even use things like, I use a paperclip technique. So I don't have them on this desk here, but they're in the next room. I have two pots. So one's full of paper clips and the other one's empty. And if I want to start doing a new habit, every time that I do it, I will move one paperclip over to the empty pot. The idea is that if it gets to 3 o'clock and I've got nothing in that empty pot, it means I'm not adhering to that particular habit. So it's visually showing me that I'm sticking to that. So it seems kind of relatively long-winded, but the idea is, how could we almost build some of the interventions that we do around this cue, behavior, reward model? Because if we can get that in place, when people go back into the workplace, if they've got the cues in place, if they've made the behaviors as easy as they possibly can, start really small, they're more likely to actually do the new things, rather than when they head back into the workplace. Well, not at the moment, but normally, typically when they head back into the office perhaps, and their workspace is littered with things with existing cues that cue them into existing behaviors. So it's almost kind of changing them. So it's designing thinking about how do we design the environment around people to cue them into these new habits. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about those ergonomics, isn't it? But it's not on necessarily a grand scale where you redesign a workspace. It could actually just be something as simple as, exactly like you just said, tracking yourself doing those new habits. So as you said, put something that gives you a cue, or it could be, so for example, over the side of my room, I've got a reward chart, which helps me with new habits. So again, it's something I can put a tick, or I can put a sticker. Mine's actually got magnets. But it's just those little things, isn't it, to prompt your subconscious brain into thinking of these new conscious habits. Is that what you're thinking? Again, it's about creating that consciousness around the new habit until it becomes what we would call in learning, you're consciously competent, and then it can start to become more subconscious again.
Yeah, absolutely. So the analogy I always used and heard was the elephant and the rider analogy. Right. Heard that one? So the elephant is your kind of subconscious impulsive mind. It's the one that kind of runs on automatic. And the rider is your rational brain, the one that's trying to keep it, make it do the right thing, steer it away from those biscuits or that chocolate when it shouldn't be eating it. But it's very difficult, because sometimes your impulsive brain is kind of stronger than your conscious brain. But then the final part of that is the path that the elephant's walking on, and that's the environment around yourself. So that's how are you designing that environment. And like you say, it's not redesigning whole workplaces perhaps, but I'll give you a dead simple example would be, I run sessions on stress and well-being and resilience and all the rest of it. And one thing that comes up all the time is that people hate emails and they hate meetings and back-to-back meetings and constant flow of emails, and it gets, it stops them doing what they want to do and it causes them stress. So one of the biggest things is, first thing in the morning, there's a cascade of habits that you'll fall into when you wake up. So you get up, you brush your teeth, you have a shower, you drive to work, perhaps pre-crisis. And when you get to work, the first thing you do, again, there's a cascade of habits that include open your Outlook up, open your emails up and start to trawl through them. Now, once you've done that, you're already fighting a losing battle because you're already into those emails. They're open. And in fact, if you're the type of person who's a morning person who is highest energy first thing in the morning, that's a real waste, because that's your best point of the day. Like 9 a.m. might be like when you're really on it, and you're wasting that energy by trawling through emails from the previous day, deleting all the spam that's come through and all the rest of it, which isn't that useful. So the main thing would be remove the queue. Don't open the emails. I know it's dead simple, but something as small as that can have a huge impact on how the first hour of your day goes. You open the emails, the hour flies by, you've not got anything done, or you leave them closed and you may actually do a more complex task, maybe a more challenging task when it comes to resilience, and you're less likely to be set back by it. You're more likely to persist and do a really good job of it, as an example.
I think that's a really good example, and you're absolutely right. So if people have that understanding of when they're going to be working at their best, as you say, when they've got the most energy, it's about making sure that you're optimizing that time so that you're using it in the most productive way. And I think in terms of well-being and mental health and resilience, I think that really ties in with that, doesn't it? Because often we'll get to the end of a day, we'll think, I haven't done these important tasks, we try and push ourselves through it then, and we're just not getting the same results. I know for me, if I'm quite tired and I'm trying to do quite an in-depth task, I find that quite stressful. Haven't maybe got the brain power for it anymore, because you're absolutely right, when the best time for me to have done that would have been earlier on in the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm big into managing energy rather than managing time. This idea that number one, knowing when you are best during a day and making the most of that, using the high energy times. You'll know this stuff, but as a psychologist, different parts of your brain take different levels of energy to tap into. You need more energy sometimes to utilize that rational thinking rather than just go along an autopilot. So actually, sometimes when you're higher energy, that's when you should be doing your challenging tasks, because had you taken them on and left them till last thing in the day when you're absolutely shattered, you get a shred of evidence that it's going the wrong way, it's becoming a bit of a disaster, and you go down that rabbit hole and it becomes a disaster. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Whereas had you taken on that same challenge in the morning, you might have thought, this is a disaster, but then you've got the energy to almost kind of turn your brain around and say, no, do you know what, I am able to deal with this and deal with it in a different way instead. So that would be one. And the other one would be boosting energy through the day. So sorry to constantly talk about water.
Right, but, sounds great.
But things like that. But anything else, like drinking enough water through the day, regular breaks, chunking up your tasks, avoiding multitasking would be a big one as well. I know that you're probably better at multitasking than I, but regardless of how good you are at it, we are. It's energy inefficient, those days when you find yourself bouncing from one thing to the next and you don't actually get anything done. Rather than that, can you sequentially process tasks? I'm really sad with this. Give me a sec. I've actually got a sand timer that does half an hour chunks, so I will do certain things in half an hour chunks, get rid of all the other cues so that they're not dragging my attention away, so I can focus on things. So it's things like that.
So is that your equivalent of using a Pomodoro method? Is that something that you use in that respect? Do you want to tell our viewers what we mean by that?
Yeah, so Pomodoro, I believe, I don't speak Italian, but I believe it's Italian for tomato. And it's they represent this analogy, they represent small chunks of time during the day. So I think it's 25 minutes in the Pomodoro technique. My sun time is half an hour, so it's about right. And what you do is, you just first thing in the morning, you decide, right, what's the one task that needs to happen today above all else? If I got nothing else done but this one task, what would that be? And you estimate how many of these Pomodoros or 25-minute chunks of time that's going to take to complete. So say it's a 2-hour task, that's roughly about 4 Pomodoros. So you set yourself, right, there's going to be 4 Pomodoros. You switch off all the other cues. So think about the habits again. You remove the other cues, like the email and switch your phone off. I put my phone in the other room often so that it's not, dragging my attention away. You set yourself a timer or get yourself a sand timer. and just focus on that one task for 25 minutes. Once you've done that, then you need to do something else. Then you need to have a break. You need to get up, move, walk around, do something completely different, and then come back to the task again and do another 25 minutes. And even if you had 5-minute breaks in there, 25 minutes, 5, 25, 5, 25, 5, you'd be amazed when you do that. I mean, I don't know if you've used these, but you not only get a load more done, but you're not nearly as knackered at the end of it as you are when you're juggling all these things all at once. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not sad enough to do this all the time. I don't run my entire day, in 25-minute chunks. But if there's something I really need to do, or if I'm feeling like perhaps today's not going to be a very productive day, then forcing yourself into this Pomodoro technique for, a couple of hours, 2-3 hours at a time can be really helpful, I think.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with everything you've just said. And again, when I coach or when I speak about how to make sure that you're focused, how to avoid procrastination, how to get started on things, even how to start tasks that you really don't want to do, like the boring tasks, like admin stuff, then I will often recommend Pomodoro, because as you say, it's so bite-sized. It's that thing with the habits, isn't it? It's so achievable to cope for 25 minutes, have a timer on, put away all distractions, no multitasking, and then just crack on with that one thing you want to get done. And I'd agree with you. I often find that because I'm not distracted and because I've got an end point in mind where I'll take a break, I'm actually so much more productive. And you're right, I don't feel that kind of, maybe sometimes you get a bit overwhelmed when you really get into a task. I don't get any of that. I don't feel so tired. The 25 minutes just literally flies by. And I find that I can get a lot of stuff done that way. But I'd agree with you. I use it as a technique when I need it rather than all the time. I'm not that organised, I'm afraid.
No, me neither. Yeah. So it goes back to the habits. It goes back to the habits with the behaviours, making it as small and as easy as possible. The other thing about habits, if you don't mind, is forming an identity around it. That's a big one, actually. So people go about habits generally in the wrong order. Okay, so when we talk about habits, there's kind of 3 levels. There's your identity at the center. Sat on top of that are the systems and the processes that you have to achieve that identity. And then finally, you have the outcomes or the goals that you want to achieve. And what people generally do when they want to kind of achieve something or change a habit, they unfortunately start from the outside in. They start with the goals. So a real common one is like losing weight. So you want to get healthier, lose weight, so you set yourself a target. I'm going to lose 2 stone or whatever it may be. Now, the problem with that, there's 2 problems with that. Number one, people set goals which are unachievable. So you set off on your journey and then 2 stone suddenly seems way too much and you give up. But the other problem with it is there's loads of research that shows that once you get there, even if you do achieve the 2 stone, then what? Like, you get to the 2 stone and you go, right, what's next? And generally what people do in the weight example is they put the weight back on because they've reached the goal, they've achieved it, brilliant, let's go eat some chocolate because I'm allowed to now. Some people set more goals, but you continually have to be doing that. So instead, what we say is, how do you start with the identity instead? So rather than setting yourself a goal, what's the type of person that you want to be? So you think about the weight loss one. Maybe you just start talking about yourself as, I'm someone who regularly exercises. The person who your friend or your family or all the rest of it, who they're just fit, a fitness freak. They love it. They love doing exercise. Well, maybe you tie your own identity around that. I'm a cyclist. I'm a runner. It's an identity-led goal rather than focusing on the outcome. So you pick yourself an identity. You prove it with small wins. The systems are still important, the processes. So, maybe you need to do more exercise and eat less chocolate as an example. That would be the process. But then the idea is that the goals and the outcomes, they'll look after themselves. You can track them if you want, but they'll look after themselves. And you're much more likely to sustain that long term rather than, you're not going to get to a point and say, right, I've lost the 2 stone, what now? Because it's just an identity that you have. And another big one, which resonates with people quite nicely and has worked for myself, is moving from I can't to I don't. I don't know if you come across this. So rather than saying, so it's identity led as well. So rather than saying I can't do something, it's I don't. It's not part of my identity. And a personal example would be a couple of years ago, I was drinking way too much caffeine, coffee and tea and all the rest of it. And it was I thought it was getting to me, you know, I thought it was affecting how I felt. So I thought, right, let's give up caffeine. So being a psychologist, I disregarded all my advice and all my what I know, and I basically just tried to do it and set myself goals of going to do it for a week or 2 weeks and see what sticks. And it didn't work. And it was only finally by doing the identity-led stuff that it stuck. So I would start to say, I don't drink caffeine. And it sounds really simple, but rather than, oh, I can't have a cup of tea today because I'm off caffeine at the moment. It's, I don't. In the same way that a vegetarian wouldn't say, oh, I'm not eating burgers today. You know, I can't. It's, I don't eat meat. You know, that's part of my identity. And we're 2 years on and I've not had any caffeine apart from maybe in Jaeger bombs, but does that count?
Doesn't count if it's got Jaeger in the title.
Yeah.
I think that's such a fantastic example, Matt, and I love that point, like you say, about that fitness. So your new identity could be I am a fit person, or I am a healthy person, or I make healthy choices. And as you said, and I know certainly even years ago I read something which was to help people give up smoking, and it actually said if someone offers you a cigarette while you're quitting, don't say I don't smoke at the moment. You just say no, I don't smoke.
Yeah,
I'm trying to give up. You say I'm a non-smoker, because a non-smoker wouldn't take a cigarette, or a person that ate healthily wouldn't, as you say, just continually eat chocolate and crisps and stuff.
Yeah, and it sounds simple, but you know, even mental health and stress, as an example, you know, there's quite a lot of research coming out at the moment about the importance of language and how what we tell ourselves makes a difference. You know, so if you're stepping onto stage to do a talk in front of 200 people and you start feeling nervous about it, just telling yourself this is excitement, this is my body getting ready to get on stage, has been shown to reduce stress, as opposed to actually I'm panicking. This is going to be a nightmare, you know. So even the way that you talk to yourself is, and that's built around that identity, really.
Absolutely, and it links in with the mindset, doesn't it? So I know that you and I will often, as psychologists, do a lot around mindset, because skills are one thing, but skills without mindset don't tend to really work, and they don't tend to embed and move forward. So it's about creating that mindset, isn't it? And I think you're absolutely right when we think about that in terms of things like resilience, things like mental health, mental health, mental ill health. And well-being. It's about, as you say, so again, like just a really simple one with the water, one of my identity things is I drink a lot of water, and that means if I then don't do that, I don't feel right. And it's not because I'm not drinking the water, it's because I know that I'm the person that drinks the water. So if I'm not doing that, it goes against my identity, but I know that it's a healthy behavior, so I want to encourage that. And similarly, I mean, personally for me, I had an experience with the resilience. So in my past where I didn't feel very resilient, and I thought that I wasn't. But actually, now that I've changed that mindset around to I am resilient, actually I find that exactly what you're saying, you kind of live that reality, don't you? It's that mindset piece around believing it before you do it, which is part of that identity that you're saying, which actually creates that reality for you.
Yeah. So how, if you don't mind me asking, I know you're meant to be interviewing me, but how did you get that to stick? Was it by saying it out loud, or was it by writing it down? You know, the identity around being resilient.
Around being resilient. Essentially for me, it was about finding evidence that I was. So what I'd done, because I'd been assessed on something which basically brought me out, like a psychometric, which brought me out as not resilient or contraindications for resilience. I really took that on as my own personal story. And again, it's that story we tell ourselves. So in my head, I wasn't a resilient person because often I'll be anxious and often I won't be able to cope, and things will get to me and I'll be quite emotional. But actually, it took someone to say to me, actually, you say you're not resilient, but here you are again. You've turned up again. You've bounced back again. Every time something knocks you down, you get back up. And it was having that story that I was telling myself, challenged by someone who actually had this evidence to say, this is what you're actually doing. Your behavior doesn't match what you're saying. That it made me realize that it was a story I had been telling myself. So that for me was a big turning point. So actually I am a resilient person. And now that I know that if things do get me down, which they still do, I know that I can still get back up again and carry on. And that for me was very powerful. I think I just wasn't giving myself that credit for the behavior. I had a mindset around it and an interpretation, but I didn't have the behavioral evidence to support what I was telling myself as my story.
Got you. And we've got all these biases as well, which kind of go, well, they can go one or two ways, can't they? So, but again, sorry, But I'm really interested in biases because they're linked to some of the stuff that I've been talking about. You know, this is all behavioural psychology, but biases, you know, even the word bias has quite a lot of negative connotations associated with it. But actually, biases can be quite useful sometimes. You know, like you talked about there, that's a classic example of like confirmation bias, because
Yes.
maybe 10 people have told you that you are very resilient, but you've got one piece of, you know, paper that says you're not. So that must be all the evidence that you need to say that you're not. And that confirms a theory that you have. But then you can use that same sort of bias and that same mental shortcut to flip it around. You know, if I'm going to focus on the piece of evidence that says I am resilient and collect that instead, then that can help me to confirm that new identity rather than the old one. So I found that really interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, as you said earlier, this is where those little cues, like putting the paper clips from one pot to another, or putting a star on a reward chart, this is what helps us to visualize and to externalize those behaviors. Often, as you know, our behaviors are really just quite automatic. And obviously we as psychologists do spend a lot more time probably looking at our own behaviors, but looking at other people's as well. But it's very easy to just get sort of caught up in those daily habits, and those things you tell yourself will be included in that. And sometimes it just needs that little sort of shock to the system to go, right, how am I going to just break this habit up? How am I going to create this new neural pathway to a new habit that I want to cultivate?
Yeah, absolutely. Love it.
So,
Easy, right?
pardon?
Easy, right?
Yeah, nailed it.
Yeah, that's why we're all doing it. That's why we're all doing it all the time. No.
So behavioural nudges, this is the term I've been hearing lately. What are your thoughts on this? Is this pretty much what you've been saying anyway?
Yeah, so it's linked to this. So nudge theory comes from, I don't know if you've read the book, but Richard Thaler wrote a book, an American psychologist, wrote a book on nudge, which I believe was called Nudge, just to make it simple. So I think that was a while ago now. That was probably 2008, 2009, so a fair way back. But he also won a Nobel Prize around these same sorts of ideas as well. But its influence, it influences all sorts of things. Around the world now, there's what they call behavioural nudge units or behavioural insight units. There's one in the UK that was set up under David Cameron. When he started doing all the work around the ONS and gross national well-being. I believe it was a similar time that they introduced these behavioural insights teams, the nudge teams. And it's to influence people's behaviour, really, using small changes. So the classic one that they always talk about is an American example where they get people to opt into pension payments. So that's the classic example that's always used around these nudges. So if you have to opt in to pay into your pension, then you're less likely to do it. The motivation's there. You want to pay into your pension, but you just don't get around to it. Whereas if you switch it around and you automatically opt people in to paying into their pension, then they never get around to cancelling it. It's almost the opposite. So even if they're motivated, actually, I could do with the money now, they don't bother. And there's even ones... Oh, can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. I think your picture's frozen, but we can still hear you.
Hello?
Hello?
Lost you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Matt, so how can you use some of this content in the workplace? How can you use nudges in the workplace?
Yeah, so I think there is an opportunity to do that. So generally the nudges are done on like a macro scale to influence, whole populations and their sorts of behaviours. But, on an individual level, or even across small teams or organisations, you can use nudges as well. So, I'll tell you an example of one thing at the moment that's a nudge, is the one-way systems around the supermarket, and they've got their little things on the floor, the markers on the floor. That's a behavioural nudge. It's meaning that you see that, and even subconsciously, you know that you need to stand that sort of distance away from somebody else. So I've heard really interesting things that people use in the workplace, like markers on the floors. So, for example, they use little steps on the floor they use it for health and safety, to make sure that people walk up and down the stairs in the right way, but maybe even from a health and well-being perspective. So came across one company who they had these steps painted on the floor round the building. So it was to encourage people to follow that track around the building and see where those steps went. So it's almost kind of getting people to walk as a result of that. Another big one around nudging is the social norms that exist. So what you tend to find is, let's take something like flexible working as an example. There's all sorts of social norms that exist around that. So people generally say that they're advocates of flexible working, that they would like to do it and that everybody else should be able to do it, but people underutilize it. So I actually think we've got an opportunity at the moment, given all that's going on with the COVID crisis and all the rest of it, to reform some of those sorts of habits and those sorts of social norms, because people are working from home more than they were before. But even, back to the nudges, I came across one company as well. There was an example I read where they even changed the default settings on Outlook so that the day was ran from 10 till 3 rather than 9 till 5. And that just even subconsciously, so you could still put things outside of those times, but you'd have to scroll a little bit. And it's even those tiny little nudges that make you think, oh yeah, maybe I should go home to do that call, or do I even need to do that call in the first place? If it's outside of the core hours. So it's just trying to almost just make people think a little bit more consciously about some of the things that they're doing on an everyday basis. And I'd be really interested. I don't think that companies utilize this enough, really. I'd be really interested to see what ideas are out there, rather than the typical, let's just invest loads of money in a wellness program, or build an on-site gym, which I think, don't get me wrong, I'm not necessarily having a go at those things. I think that's better than nothing. But how are you actually taking the extra step to make sure that people want that, or will actually use it? And because it involves a change of behavior, because if they didn't have those things previously, they're going to have to change behavior by definition to start using them. So you're going to need some sort of behavioral psychology, some sort of nudge system behind that to get them working. And yeah, I think that might be the next kind of stage in terms of workplace well-being, is how we actually utilize behavioral psychology, behavioral economics to get some of this stuff to stick, really. And technology.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is absolutely fascinating, and I know you and I could sit and talk about this all day. Last question. So any digital products that you would recommend or that you think work well, anything, or any way that you think digital products can be brought into this conversation more?
Yeah, well, digital products are great because they tend to have behavioral psychologists on staff. So if you ever think about like Amazon, buying stuff off Amazon, it says there's a limited amount left, and there's if you click here, then you get the Prime free, and all these sorts of things. They're tiny nudges to make you actually make a buying decision. When you buy your train tickets, that it does the limited time left again. It shows you how much you've saved and why this is such a bargain, and it's only 300 quid to get to London. And you go and buy the ticket. The behavioural nudges to make you do these things. So technology already has aspects of behavioural psychology to get these things to stick. So I'm just really interested in how we use that for the benefit of well-being rather than the detriment. So one thing I'm really interested in, I don't really know the answer to this, is why the vast majority of really addictive technologies tend to be relatively negative when it comes to our well-being. So you think about like how addictive Netflix is, and you could watch it for 6 hours at a time. Why can't the gym be as addictive as that? I know it is for some people, but you know what I mean. Or the people get into their Fitbits and all the rest of it, but is it as big an industry as some of the other, e-commerce industries or entertainment industries? Perhaps not. So can we use some of the lessons that they've learned, but for positive things? And there's loads of examples of that. So I've talked about like your Fitbits and your Apple Watches, and that's all behavioural psychology, nudges and all that sort of thing. I've got an app as well that I've built, which is all around tracking habits. So it's a companion app that goes alongside the training that we run and the coaching. And it provides a number of things. So you add courses to it, and you can access materials through there. It's got a habit tracker on there, so you can track your habits over time. It's even got a feed, so you can interact with other people to see what everyone else is doing in terms of adhering to the goals that they set or the commitments that they made to themselves during the session. So the idea of that was to try and make the training and the coaching a little bit more sticky. Get it to stick long term. Give them something else to do. They reckon that people spend about 3.5 hours every single day on their phone. So let's deliver it through the phone. You know, let's get some of these things delivered through people's phones. They're going to be constantly looking at them. It uses notifications, pop-up notifications that you can set, by the way, so they're not going to be annoying you all day long, to nudge you into these behaviors. So yeah, it's all that side of thing that I'm really interested by, and the insight that technology can give as well. Unless it's a report telling you that you're not resilient, in which case,
in which case, less useful.
Yeah, don't do that.
That sounds absolutely fantastic, Matt. Really looking forward to seeing that. And I know that at the moment you're just working with that and getting that rolled out. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's launched. And it's available. Number of different audiences, really. So if you're a trainer, either freelance or you work within a business, you can upload your own courses onto there and use it with your own courses that way. If you're an internal trainer or facilitator within a business, again, you can upload courses onto it. Or if you want to utilize some of the courses that we've already got, primarily around we've got wellbeing, there's one around managing psychological health and safety, which is a whole other session in itself. How managers can really have conversations about wellbeing with their staff. There's even one around emotional intelligence as well. So if you want to access some of those, you can purchase them through the app as well. So yeah.
Perfect. It sounds really useful, and I know certainly from my point of view as a psychologist that consults with organizations, often it's hard to demonstrate the ROI that you're delivering. So you're having a great session, people are taking things away, they're committed to going and doing things. You might be having action learning sets or coaching to see how that's working, but you're absolutely right. Sometimes those tangible aspects are much harder to capture, aren't they? And much harder to sort of demonstrate that learning journey that either individuals are going on, but also that organizational culture journey. So I think that really fills that gap that certainly I know I've experienced in the past, where I've not been able to demonstrate the impact that we're having.
Yeah, absolutely. So we didn't have time to get into it this time around, but this maybe came across, but I love data. I'm a data junkie. I love it, and the more data we can collect, whether that's people actually adhering to their habits on their habit tracker, whether that's accessing some of the content after the session, you're able to tell if they're doing that. But the other thing is you can also administer questionnaires through there as well, so you can carry on sending people little prompts. How are you doing? What impact have you stuck to your commitments? What impact have those commitments had when you've got back into real life and that side of things? So it's all about how do we collect as much data as we possibly can, really, through something like that.
Absolutely amazing. Well, I'll tell you what, I think we should get you on again, because I'd love to hear much more about that. Love to hear about how that data is really driving things forward. So let's definitely do this again, Matt. I think that's going to be really valuable for our viewers.
Yeah, I'll always talk about data. Yeah, all day long. No problem.
I think we could talk all day. Right then, thank you so much, guys. That was Matt Smead from Sisu Psychology. I've been Steph the Psychologist from Synergy Consulting. And we'll come to you again soon with more fantastic content. And again, very soon, back with Matt to talk to us more about data and how we can use it to embed learning. Right. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let us know. Give us a little subscribe, a like, comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And we'll speak to you soon. Thank you.